I think that for today's topic, we have something exciting. We're going to have the chance to understand three key things. The first thing is, what is the data that you should be considering in the case that you want to know how are your PGT results going? The second thing is, where can you have access to that information? And the third thing, I am excited about this third thing because as someone that has been working inside of an IVF lab and that then moved to the industry and started working from the genetic testing perspective, is what is the connection between those rates and that data and the procedures and the protocol that you do in the lab. So the first thing is, what is the key information that we should be considering? That is what we refer to as key performance indicator. This is a publication from 2017. This is a consensus that was reached by ASRM and also scientists at Alpha. What they decided is that they put together a panel of 12 key parameter indications that were defined as those related to the core business of the ART laboratory. So within these 12 parameters, there's only one that was related with the PGT results, and that one is referred to as successful biopsy rate. That means what is the proportion of your embryos that you biopsy and that you load the cells in a tube and that you send to a PGT lab and that you get an informative result. Successful biopsy rate is also referred to as informativity rate. And that implies two things. When you have a result that is non-informative, it could be either because there's no DNA or it's not amplified, or there was DNA but the quality of the DNA is not enough. It might have degradation or it might be fragmented. So in that scenario, it would fall within the non-informative category. So how do you check that information? So now with this tool that we have at Igenomix, which is the clinical dashboard, you can have access to this online. So you have your data on demand. Within that dashboard that you can have access, if you're working with us and you're sending your PGT samples to Igenomix, you can request access to this and you can have all this information. So the way it looks like is that you have two main panels. There's one panel which is for the PGT-A related results, and there's another panel which is for the endometrial test or ERA related results. Within the PGT-1, you have three main dashboards. The first dashboard is what we call the overall view clinic. And in this one, you can have multiple different information that is key for you to understand how your lab is performing. So the way it works is that within the horizontal, you're going to have all the parameters that you can check. So that be the percentage of normal or euploid embryos, the percentage of informativity, maternal average age, and many other things. That's going to be listed in the horizontal line. You can also filter each of these parameters, and that's going to be shown in the vertical. And those are the filters that you can apply to each of the parameters in the rates that you can check. The one in black is the one that we have just explained, which is the percentage of informative embryos. And that is very relevant for you to understand how the biopsies and the loading process is working in your lab. There's another key thing for these dashboards. Once you have selected the parameter and once you have selected the filters, you're going to have here in the middle side two columns. So this dashboard is going to make a comparison in terms of the timing. So for example, you can see what is the percentage of informative embryos in the current year versus the previous year. And you also have a breakdown per month. That is very interesting because in my experience doing this troubleshooting with the labs, we have been able to conclude or to at least have some hypotheses and problems related with non-informative rates just because of the month breakdown for this information. So sometimes it's related with a new protocol, new technician, new embryologist, and that's something that's very useful information right here. The second dashboard within the PGT panel is the clinic comparison. So as you can see, the horizontal and the vertical is the same parameters and the same filters. The difference is that in this case, you can compare the results from your lab and from other labs. So that's going to be other labs within your network. That's going to be on group 2. You're always going to be group 1. Another option is to compare your results with Igenomix USA. And the last option is Igenomix Global. We think that this is very important because this should always be a two-way street. It's not about how well you are performing the biopsies or the loading procedure. It's also about how well is Igenomix performing. Just to give you an idea, the benchmark that was published in this study from the Vienna Consensus is 95%. So ideally, you should be at least at 95% having informative results. What we have currently as average at Igenomix USA is 98%. So that's something that I think it makes us at Igenomix very happy, is that the quality of our results is very high, and you could be easily within that 98% of informativity rates. And I can tell you that I have clinics that are currently at 99%. That's almost unbeatable. It's almost 100% of the samples that you send are gonna have a result. And the last dashboard is also very interesting because everything that is non-euploid or non-normal is going to be considered an abnormal result. But under that umbrella, we have multiple different options. You could have an embryo that is aneuploid or segmental aneuploid or mosaic chaotic, and then you can also have the information for each of the chromosomes. So all that information for that category of abnormal is going to be in the third dashboard. As well, within here, you can compare your results against another lab from your network, Igenomix USA or Igenomix Global. So let's imagine a situation in which you're below the benchmark, you maybe have 95 or 94% informativity rate, somewhere around there, and you want to boost your results. So what is that connection? That's what I was trying to explain. What is that connection between the procedure and these rates? Because once you have this knowledge, you have the tool to take your results to the next level. So let's review this. This is our loading protocol. Most of the people that have been working in an IVF lab or in the clinic in general, they would think that this is the most easier protocol. And in some ways it probably is, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is once you have the biopsy, you're going to collect those biopsied cells, the trophectoderm cells, you're going to wash it in our buffer, put it in the tube, freeze it, and send it back to us. So it's supposed to be easy, but I'm going to use a sentence that I learned here in the US, which is the devil is in the detail. And I think that absolutely applies for this protocol, because there's some details that are going to have a big impact on your results. So for example, for the first step, one of the recommendations that we have in the protocol is before you start with the biopsy and you have the embryos out, you know that the faster that you work is the better, not only for the embryos, but also for the biopsies. Why? Because if you have those cells after the biopsy in the hood sitting there while you're labeling the tubes, preparing the kit and everything else, you have more chances for having DNA fragmentation, and that's going to be related with your non-informative results. So one of the things is just be prepared before you take out the embryos and start the biopsies, and have all of the tubes, everything ready for the loading procedure. The second thing that is crucial in this first step is to have intact cells. So if there was any kind of lysis during the biopsy because of the laser or the flicking method or anything else, that's something that we don't want within the tube, just because that could mess with the diagnosis, because it might have an effect in, for example, having an increased rate of mosaicism results. Within the second step, which would be the wash this, there's a few things that are very important. The first thing, when you are working with embryos, you want to have 37 Celsius degrees, just because you want to keep the embryos in a good environment. However, that's not the case after the biopsy. Once you have those cells, you just need to be working at room temperature. So just be sure that within your hood, it's an unheated surface. That's very important, and it will be related again with the quality of the DNA and the non-informative results. The second thing that is relevant is the buffer. So most of the times what happens is that we have clinics that are not working with a single genetic testing lab, and you might have buffers from multiple different laboratories. It's very important that you only use the buffer specific to that genetic testing lab. In our case is the washing buffer from Igenomix. So just be careful with that. It's very important and might have an impact in your informativity rates. And finally, it's the oil. So once you move to the washing this, it's important that you're not using oil anymore. So what is the connection with using the oil and the informativity? Well, if there's oil within the tube and with the cells, once we put the buffer for the amplification, it might have an impact, negative impact in that amplification process. So it's very important that the cells are clean and that there's no oil in that dish. So the next step is the PCR collection tube. So there's two things that are very important. The first one is the volume. So we need to have a very concentrated sample take into account that you're only putting like 5 to 10 trophectoderm cells. Is very small amount of DNA, so it's key that you put a very small volume. So we recommend nothing more than 5 microliters, and it's important to take into account the micropipette that you're taking. So for example, if you're using a mouth pipette, it would be very difficult to measure the volume. So we recommend using something that you can really measure the volume, and be careful with this step. And the next thing is the location of the samples. So you can do dry loading or pre-loading, but what is key is that once you have the tube, the sample is going to be in the very bottom of the tube. And that's why we also recommend, that this is not mandatory, but it's a recommendation, that you include a spinning right after you load the cells in the tube. The reason is that, again, we want to ensure that the sample is going to be in the bottom of the tube. Why is this important, and how is this correlated with the non-informative results? Well, once we receive the samples, we're going to put the buffer for the DNA amplification, and if the buffer doesn't reach the cells because they were in the wall of the tube, it's not going to get amplified. So it's going to be results as a no DNA. So even if you loaded the sample, if they were in the wall but not in the bottom of the tube, that's not going to get amplified, not going to get sequenced, and it's going to be a no DNA. So it's very, very important. It's also very important that this happens before you freeze the samples, because otherwise, even if we spin the samples at our lab at Igenomix, they just get stuck to the wall and they're not going to go down. And then lastly is that you have to freeze the samples before shipping them to Igenomix. And this is also related with the location of the sample, because let's say that you actually did put the samples in the bottom of the tube, but the sample was not frozen, and once we received it, take into account that it's going to be moved, it's going to be in a box that is well protected, but at the same time, people is placing them and moving around with the box, so the cells might be misplaced. So it's very important that you freeze the sample so that we ensure that it's going to remain in the bottom of the tube. Also, that's going to have an effect in the DNA quality, because we want to avoid extreme temperatures, that meaning too hot temperatures, but also too cold temperatures. So it has to be frozen at -20 Celsius, but not -80. So what I was saying a little bit earlier is that even though the official definition for KPI is that are those related to the core business of the ART laboratory, I strongly believe, as someone that has been in both sides of the story, that this should be a two-way street, and that we both have a responsibility in the results. So on our side, from Igenomix, one of the things that we do is that we have a whole scientific team that is here to help you troubleshoot your results. All of us except Alan are attending this meeting at ASRM 2022, so please don't hesitate to come introduce yourself. We are a team of scientific advisors. You can also have direct access to the laboratory director at US and Canada, and also the diagnostic manager, and Juliana Cucci, who is our VP in science. So we're always here to help. This is our email in case that you want to request access to your dashboard, or in case that you want to troubleshoot your results, we can do that. And we also have training courses for biopsies and loading procedures. So don't hesitate to send an email, and we will be happy to help. Thank you very much.